I Dig a Pygmy by Charles Hawtrey and the Deaf Aids. Phase 1, in which Doris gets her oats. Welcome
Wait.
the Bladtcast.
A few of us on the Bladtcast talking Beatles, all from our home. You brought me right into the song I was going to lead
no
with.
Ringo. Yeah, well, I didn't realize that it was right there. Welcome to the Get Bladtcast. I am the Blatt in the title, the one and only Mr. Christian Blatt, joined by our friend Gene Barretta. Some of you know him as Gene from Philly. And obviously, if I was going to do a show talking about the Beatles, he was the first person that I would think of. And Gene, it looks like for show and tell, you've brought a friend today. Why don't you tell our audience who's here with us?
I will. I brought along Mark Nelson, who is a friend and general manager of the Great Mahoning Drive-In in Lehighton, Pennsylvania. And if you don't know about this drive-in, you can go to Amazon Prime and watch a documentary called At the Drive-In. And just I'll make it really short. They're a retro drive-in, and they're the last drive-in in the country to show 35 millimeter. And they have all these great themed weekends during the course of the season, where people are dressed up and they decorate, and they have people from the movie, and they're the most passionate people about these movies. And it's a step back in time. And Mark is so passionate about his job. You'll learn in part one, when he was just an employee, that every weekend he drove 6 hours from New Hampshire, right? New Hampshire.
It was Southwestern
to work there, and then he would sleep over in the snack stand and go back another 6 hours every weekend for the season. Yeah, I know. And now he's in New York, so he's just 2 hours away from work.
Well, that's amazing, Mark. Thank you for joining us. I traded messages with Mark when we were setting this up, and I consider myself very fortunate for someone from my generation. I'm 45 as we're recording this, but I grew up with drive-in. The first time I saw Star Wars, it was the re-release, but it was at the drive-in. The drive-in, which is still open near where I grew up. It's the Warwick Drive-In in Warwick, New York. Obviously, drive-ins back that way, not open this time of year, but I consider myself very lucky to have sort of had that experience. My mom, of course, would make popcorn at home, and then we would eat it at the drive-in, which is probably not what you want people to think when they go to your drive-in, but
buy food.
Yeah, buy food. Exactly. But, there was a supermarket on the other side of the drive-in. So, my dad would go to the supermarket, and I'm like, I'm going to just sit in the car, and I would listen to the movie on the FM radio. And, last year, really most of my movie going was at drive-ins. And the nice thing about living in Los Angeles is, I guess there's a couple, but one is that within less than an hour, there are 3 drive-ins. One of them I liked very much. The other 2 were fine. But so I love your story and the fact that you're keeping the drive-in alive. So you'll be open, I assume, sometime in the spring for the next season.
Every season is last weekend in April until last week in October for us, because we're in Pennsylvania, where it gets mightily cold. I'm always jealous of folks in other parts of the country where they do have drive-ins all year round. But for us in the Northeast, it's generally follows the school calendar. So mostly it's a summer thing.
One year I was in Palm Springs, and I couldn't believe that they didn't have a drive-in. I was just like, what? How do you not have a drive-in, year round, really? So that's great. So Mark,
let me just add one thing. This place is so cool. They had a weekend where the theme was wrestling movies, and they had a professional wrestling ring built under the screen on the lawn between the screen and the cars. And they had, would you call them semi-pro wrestlers or pro wrestlers?
Regional pro wrestlers, I would say.
Yeah, for like 2 hours having matches and things. And they had a DeLorean for the Back to the Future things. It's just, it's such a great place. I can't stop talking about it.
Well, and Mark, in addition to the drive-in, I believe you have a podcast that is also branded.
Yes, we do Mahoning Drive-In Radio, which is a more or less weekly podcast where we just talk about running a drive-in in 2021 and drive-in memories and running a theater and movies in general.
Well, our pal in the live chat, Dominicus Saxon, says our last local drive-in, he lives in Idaho, closed down about 25 years ago, and I still miss that experience. And yeah, I think that there are fewer and fewer of them as time goes by. And it was, during the pandemic, there were, during the height of the pandemic, I guess is the correct way to classify that. There was a movie theater not too far from where we live in Van Nuys where they owned the end of there's sort of the side wall of a mall that they were in, so they were able to project on the side there, and we took the kids and they were excited. We took them to see Tom and Jerry. And for anybody that hasn't seen Tom and Jerry, all you need is the review of my then 5-year-old son, which was the number of times he asked, "Where are Tom and Jerry?" Because there's not enough Tom and Jerry in the Tom and Jerry movie. And he was absolutely right about that. But we're talking about Go ahead.
What was resurgence? Drive-ins came alive again during COVID. One of the few positive things about it. Yeah.
It's terrible to say, but we did very good business last year. A lot of people discovered us and rediscovered the drive-in experience due to it being really the only feasible place people could gather safely. So we gained a lot of new fans and followers and a lot of media attention over the course of the last year. So the drive-ins that are around are fewer and farther between than they were when we were all young. I think at its height there were about 3,000 in America, and now there's 300 or less. So support your local, and hopefully they'll limp along into the next decade at least.
So do you think that you could have a special weekend where you show all 3 parts of Peter Jackson's Get Back Beatles documentary? You'd have to start around 8. Let's say you start at 8 p.m. and that would go to 4 a.m.
It would have to be done early or late in the season. We've done triple features that run really long, so it's theoretically feasible that we could do that. It's not really what we do. We try to stay to 35 millimeter and old films, but a weekend of the 3 Beatle movies or 4 Beatle movies, I think would be fantastic.
Yeah. And are you able to, and just forgive the ignorance, are you able to show things in 70 millimeter, or is the screen not formatted for that?
It's just 35, but 70 would require a different projector, so we can't do that. I don't know that I've ever heard of a drive-in that could do 70, because I think they just had the standard equipment installed, and that was that. We do have a makeshift digital booth, so theoretically we could show something newer or a Peter Jackson TV documentary, but that's probably not what we're going to do.
They still have the simplex projectors that were there in 1949.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a great starting point, though, for our conversation about the Beatles Get Back. Is I texted Gene about this because when I had the idea that we would do a show about it, I knew that I was not going to be able to watch it Thanksgiving weekend. I just knew that I would not find the time. Especially, unfortunately, when my son ended up being sick for about a week. He had a little fever and a little cold, and boy, that threw everything off. And when I actually finally got to sit down and I opened Disney Plus, I'm like, well, I knew that each part was movie length. What I didn't realize is that they're all Marvel movie length. There's one that's like almost the first part, I think, is like almost 4 hours, and I was like,
the longest one's just about 3.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I was like, okay, so this, in my mind, I was needing 6 hours for it. And I'm like, no, I need 8 hours. So that was a great starting point. Now, I believe that I saw the Let It Be movie. I believe I saw once. I saw like a VHS bootleg of the Japanese Laserdisc. And I know it was that because there were Japanese subtitles the whole time. So
it was incredibly hard to see. Oh, really? In the theater?
I saw it in the theater when it first came out in like 77 or 78.
Oh, it came out that late.
It first came. Did it? Well, maybe it was
released.
Excuse me. Okay, so it was I saw it in a theater though, first time then, but it was re-released, and I saw it. In the late 70s.
It only hit video once. It hit Laserdisc and VHS in this country somewhere around the early 80s via Magnetic Video, which was like the first home video company. And then it never got re-released. So what most of us saw were bootlegs. They were VHS bootlegs or bootlegs from a Japanese Laserdisc. And it just became increasingly impossible to see.
It was right up there with the Star Wars Christmas special and Roger Corman's Fantastic Four movie from 1994. Those were like my three like holy grails of like, I can't believe I can watch this now. But I honestly don't remember the movie very much. And I'm not quite sure what, obviously there's so much more of this, but I don't know how different the narrative seems. I want to start with, for me, the biggest takeaway, and then you can each chime in, is look, there's this notion that people have had that even before I really knew much about the Beatles and I knew much about music, there was this notion that Yoko Ono broke up the Beatles. And you watch this movie and you know what broke up the Beatles? The Beatles broke up the Beatles. You can see how difficult it is for them to work with each other. There's the moments where it's great to watch how much fun they're having. But I mean, we see George quit the band, and there's a lot of things that John directs sort of very passive aggressively at Paul, and years later he would say,
it all started during the White Album. That was already, all that stuff was going on for at least a year or more, 18 months or so. And a lot of people, what they didn't address in the new movie or in the first one is that John and Yoko were doing heroin at the time, and they didn't kick it until August of that year. Yeah. So that's why John's probably late a lot.
Yeah, I was actually wondering that, and that was one of the things that I definitely was wondering. And obviously, Ringo is tired very much throughout this.
I think he must have been sick with a cold or something.
Yeah, he talked about how he had to go to a doctor at one point. But and I think it's, if anything, it's just very funny the way that Yoko's almost always there. She's knitting, she's reading the newspaper, and to me, it's funny. It's not, I don't think, I think that everybody else, the other guys all know that, like, yeah, if John's going to be there, Yoko's going to be with him. But I would have thought that it would have felt, I don't even know, not hostile. I thought they would have been annoyed that she was there, but it didn't really come across that way. Let me ask you first, Mark. What did you think sort of about the Yoko of it all? Like, I assume at some point in your life, you must have been able to subscribe to the notion, like, well, it seems like everybody says Yoko broke up the Beatles,
Well, that was what you heard for so long. That was part of, common knowledge or lore. But the more I read, I read a lot of Beatle books so far in my life, and I watched a lot of documentaries, and it more and more came out what you said. It was just, they were all at a point in their lives where they were starting to get interested in things outside the group. Ringo was making movies pretty regularly. They said at the beginning of this documentary that part of the reason for the time frame of when they had to be done by was because Twickenham Studio was the space they were in was going to be used for sets for the Magic Christian. And indeed, while they're sitting there rehearsing, you're seeing trucks bringing sets into that space. Yeah. Like, he was going to start a movie right after this. And that's George talks at one point about,
I was going to say, we can talk about this later, but that's why Peter Sellers shows up.
Yeah, which was great.
And you see, George was talking about, he had so many songs that he was like itching to release, which would become, a triple album as soon as he had the chance.
Yeah, let me just jump in for a second. There's one point where, he plays All Things Must Pass, and it doesn't come up again, and look, there's great songs that make it onto the Let It Be album. And I forgot a little bit about the timeline, that obviously, of course, they would also be like sprinkling in some Abbey Road songs. I kind of forgot that, like, that the sort of the lineage of Abbey Road being released first, but this being the same time. But
also, let me just add to that.
Sure.
Excuse me, sorry.
I'm glad you added that, Gene.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to vomit.
Like, for sure.
Sneeze. Abbey Road they started recording it less than a month after the Let It Be sessions. So all those songs were round and ready to go and ready to be, filled.
The idea that they would have done Maxwell Silverhammer by hitting the anvil live in front of an audience is actually kind of fun, But but to Mark's point, just sort of George and John have a great exchange. I think it was in part 3, just sort of this idea that, he's got all this music that he wants to get out, and he's starting to realize that, you could do that. You could do the Beatles stuff, but John's even like, I think John's being sort of supportive and complimentary to his material. He's like, yeah, we could do the Beatles, but it's all really George. I forget what title he used, So you can sort of expand on that, Mark.
Well, what he was saying was, he has all this music he wants to get out. And as you said, John was very supportive. And that was kind of surprising to me. And I might have read that once before, but Lennon was like, yeah, go ahead, do that. And then we'll do a Beatle album. Like, it was basically encouraging. And they all had released, I think, at this point, except McCartney. Was Sentimental Journey released when the Beatles were still together?
Nothing was released before they broke up.
Or was it? I'm thinking of Wonderwall music.
Oh, Wonderwall, yeah, Wonderwall was, I think.
I thought in the Family Way album, there were a couple of albums that had their names on them that weren't Beatle records, and the idea was
they were both of those were soundtracks, though, I think. So it was a little bit different than a solo singles album,
record. So what they were suggesting was, yeah, maybe we could do solo albums and then get back together and do Beatle records, which was kind of fascinating. So all this was going on, and so much was pulling them in so many different directions, and they repeatedly say, I wish Mr. Epstein, which I thought was cool. They called him Mr. Epstein still, like they were schoolboys. I wish Mr. Epstein was here because we need somebody to sort of rein us in and give us direction and crack the whip. All of that is what was pulling them apart. Yoko being there was there were a lot of people there. That's another thing too, is I'm only used to the Let It Be version of this, which is 80 something minutes, maybe 90 minutes, not very long. And it's mostly focusing on the Beatles. And it was shot square 4:3 on 16 millimeter film, blown up to theatrical 35. So you're losing the sides you're losing the top and the bottom, and then being put on video where you're losing the sides again. So you're really only seeing part of the frame of the image that was captured. You don't get a sense of space. There were a lot of people hanging around. Maureen Starkey was there. Linda Eastman was there. So many, Mal Evans, so many hangers on were in that space.
And let's not forget the Hare Krishners that were there in the
just hanging off on the side.
Yeah. And it was just sort of like, and it was just sort of mentioned very much in passing. I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Gene?
No, there's the girls they call the Apple Scruffs, who you can see sometimes just standing outside waiting for a Beatle to come by, or looking through the basement windows when they move over to Savile Row.
Yeah. In terms of some of the extra people that were around, personally, I really enjoyed the sequence. It's early in episode 3 with Heather, then Eastman, later Heather McCartney, who Paul adopted when he and Linda got married. I just thought it was sort of very cute. As I have 2 small children, my son is 6, my daughter just turned 4, but just sort of, her running around making cat noises, and John just so matter-of-factly talking about, like, well, you can't eat the one with the black spot. That one's not good to eat. And just, it was so funny to see that sort of side, and then drumming alongside Ringo,
and she imitating Yoko, go, oh,
yeah. The look on her face during what I believe is called the Freak Out Jam was nice, and the whole thing was just very endearing. And Paul's holding Heather Eastman at that point, when they're all just talking, and you can tell that she's like, all right, I'd like to, go home. But I didn't realize, just there were so many people in and out of it. But obviously what makes this so compelling is just watching them work stuff out together. Now, I think that the thing that so many people were talking about when this first premiered over Thanksgiving weekend was just the way that Paul kind of sits down and he doesn't really have anything. He's just got a little bit of a riff for Get Back. And the film being called Get Back because just watching it evolve into what we all know it as, I mean, that was one of those, and there's a lot of those moments where you're watching them sort of like come up with the lyrics to some of these songs. But I think that that, to me, that's a great reason to call this Get Back. What did you think about that, Gene? Now, Gene, let me, before you answer, you're also very familiar with a lot of this material, right? You've heard a lot of these outtakes, and you've seen, you probably feel like Peter Jackson did us a disservice by not turning in a 55-hour cut.
Yeah, exactly. No, I do. First of all, I loved it. It was, like you used the term earlier, this was like a holy grail for a Beatles fan. But they did do more of things like All Things Must Pass and all, but you're just not going to see it in a cut.
Sure.
It's 8 hours, because I have about 90 hours of the audio that was recorded during the sessions, and you do hear songs over and over. So it is there, and it is done more. One thing, to go back on an earlier point, one of the big differences from the first film to this is that they take more liberties with the chronology of the events. Like I think it was in part 3 when Paul and John were having a little bit of a private conversation. in a room together, and Paul's saying, George doesn't want to do films, and we have to do this stuff. All that happened much earlier in the first one, and things were out of context. But that stuff happens when you have to make a short, condensed version to give the spirit of it all. But did you have a specific question, or what were you asking me?
Just sort of about the reason why I sort of put in the qualifier that you're familiar with this material, but the idea of watching Paul start with pretty much nothing for Get Back, and just sort of that evolution. That
the title could just be that you're jumping. It's just he's basically saying we're going back in time to watch something that occurred too, which is a nice double meaning of it. But it is nice to see. There's been a lot of criticism. I don't even know how much criticism there is, because most people love it, but a lot of people aren't ready to watch that the Beatles just sit without a thought in their head until it comes, and then go through the same verses 5-6 times. I think, what I think it is, though? I think a lot of people didn't know that Peter Jackson's film was done after Frodo left the band, so they were really disappointed in that aspect of it.
Well, I think that, a lot of times, like a really good documentary of any kind, especially a music documentary, you can tell people, you don't really have to be a fan of the music or the band. I've seen very interesting documentaries about music that I'm not particularly interested in, but this one is so in depth and you spend so much time with it. I'm like, you have to like these songs. I mean, I guess you don't have to like these songs, but you have to like the Beatles. You have to want to spend 8 hours with the Beatles. Did you find that, Mark, it's not particularly accessible for your casual fan and, somebody that might not know much about them? This wouldn't be the place to start.
That's what I keep thinking when I see the criticism. People say it's boring. It's just the Beatles sitting around. Well, that's what a lot of us have. I used to say when I was younger and was first seriously getting into them.
Sorry, when you were younger, so much younger than today?
Exactly.
Okay, great.
I never really needed anybody's help in any way. I always said anytime they coughed into an open microphone, I'd want to hear it. Then I did get access to a lot of those Get Back sessions, and I was like, well, maybe not every time they coughed. And I always thought too, if anybody's familiar with these audio bootlegs, most of them came from like the Nagra tapes that the film production company was recording, not what the recording studio engineers were recording. So you had almost as much some guy going, reel 7, reel 5, boop, take. There's so much of that interrupted so many songs. I always thought that guy's, whoever's voice that was, is like the most beloved or most hated guy in Beatle bootleg fandom, because he talked over so much of that music. Anyway, I do think that this is something that is more for the serious hardcore fans, either fans of music history or more specifically Beatle fans, because who wants to look at 8 hours of some random band figuring out what songs they're going to play? Probably not everybody. I think you need to be a fan of those songs and those people.
There's a lot of bands like I wouldn't want to see 8 hours of recording. Well, when we talk about super fans of the Beatles, we have a great friend who's joining us for a few minutes during her workday. And when we bring Terry and Temecula on, there's only one way to bring her on, of course.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I haven't heard this in a long time. Oh my god, our two dogs. Oh my gosh.
And of course, the most high-tech way to utilize any kind of music production is to hold your iPod up to a microphone and stream it. Terry, I wanted to, I know you only have a few minutes.
Hi, Gene. Hi,
there's
Mark.
Gene. And then this is Mark, who you don't know, but obviously.
I saw his name.
You're like, I can read.
Yes, you can see his name.
And Terry, I understand that you haven't had a chance to sit down with Get Back yet, but the reason why I wanted to talk to you, we were just talking about George a few minutes ago, and I know George was always your favorite, and I wanted to let you have a moment to talk about George. And it's very clear how frustrated he is with
Yeah.
being a part of the Beatles. I mean, he quits during the Let It Be sessions.
Oh my
the
gosh.
end of part one. Spoiler alert: George
Okay.
has quit, and
Okay.
you can just sort of see it's like, John and Paul, even at this point, their relationship's a little bit strained, but they still work together. But he's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I wrote a new song last night," and he's doing everything by himself.
Of
And
course.
thank God Ringo gets to show a little Octopus's Garden towards the end of this,
Yeah.
because
Uh-huh.
you're just like, I don't know what he's been working on during all this. But so I wanted you to talk a little bit about George and
Okay.
why you love George so much, and why he's such an important part of the Beatles.
Well, when I was a little girl, my big sister had the Beatles records, and she always said that George was her favorite. And so I wanted to copy her, and George was my favorite too. And also, in the later albums where he's got the long hair and the beard, I seriously thought he was Jesus. So I just saw him as this godlike figure there, and just through his all things must pass, and here comes the sun, and what is life, and I don't know, you just really can relate to someone who finally, when he was done with the Beatles, he was at peace. And I don't know, a few years ago, there was a tree planted in George's name, and it died because beetles infested it. I don't know, did you
Oh,
ever hear
wow.
about that?
No.
Yeah, beetles had
What a
killed
great
the
story.
tree. Yeah.
That's so funny.
Well, the
Uh-huh.
interesting thing, and they deal with it, we were talking a moment ago, Terry, that during these recording sessions, George has, there's a couple of Hare Krishnas there that are there to
Mm.
sort of keep him company.
Yeah.
They talk a lot about the sort of the spirituality of their trip to India. And the
Mm.
takeaway is really that John and Paul are glad that they went,
Hmm.
but they weren't really into it. And Ringo very bluntly says that he did not enjoy the trip, which I thought was,
Mm.
it was nice to hear that level of honesty. And George is actually a little surprised at one point that he even
Hmm.
asks them, "Would you rather you not have gone?" And they both say, "No, no, no, we're glad we went." So they didn't
Hmm.
want him to think that. But I mean, that's such an important part. I mean, obviously, his contributions on the albums from Sgt. Pepper's on all seem to really
Hmm.
be influenced by that, and that was such an important part of him. But
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about the spirituality of George and how that, I mean, more so than really any of the other three of them. I mean, that's such an important part of his music.
Well, of course. And recently, I just became a great aunt, and my niece and nephew had a son. Guess what his name is?
I'm gonna guess.
Dylan George.
Yeah,
He was
I know
named
you
Oh
were
after
my
George
always
gosh.
Harrison.
disappointed. I know you were always
Um,
disappointed that I named my son Felix and didn't
Felix,
name him
yeah, but if
George.
I call
My
him
middle
George,
name is
but
George, so
yeah.
I
But
but
saw
she
my
said they did a gender reveal online because they didn't want to burn down Burbank with their gender reveal, so they did it online.
yeah,
And they
which I appreciate as
when
a
they
Burbank resident.
yeah,
Yeah, thank you
and
for
they
not
played
burning down
"Here
Burbank.
Comes the Sun"
Oh,
when
very
they
nice.
revealed they were going to have a boy. So I think he just speaks to all generations. It's timeless. He's just timeless.
Yeah,
my fa-
well,
my favorite license plate I've ever seen is from Georgia, and below the word Georgia it says Harrison.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Terry, I appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with us, and I do
Yeah.
hope that you get a chance. At some point, you could just sign up for Disney Plus for a month and
Yeah,
take
I'll
the
give it a
time to
try.
watch it. And
And can I just say hi to Gene? Gene, I see your books every day at work. I'm a children's librarian now. And
Oh, you
I see
are.
your books and I recommend them. So I hope you keep writing them because I'll definitely order them for the library.
Well, Terry, just get in touch with me privately, and I'll send you some signed ones.
Yes, that'd be
Okay.
wonderful.
And by the way, Dominicus Saxon was very excited to see you, and your theme song really brought him back.
Oh,
Uh,
good. Thank you.
yeah, well, Terry, and I'm sure that as soon as we have an excuse to do an Orson Welles show, we'll have you on for that as well.
Oh, yeah. I
I
got some
think
good
that
ones for that.
we could probably do a whole show on the frozen peas out there. The Yes Always recording
Yes,
session.
always.
You know, why is there not an 8-hour documentary on the Yes Always? You know. But Terry, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for giving us a few minutes here on the Bladtcast.
Bye, Terry.
Thank
Are you doing sign language? Oh,
I think she was.
No
Yeah.
sign language. Yeah.
So, but let's.
By the way,
go ahead.
Just while we're on the George thing, also, to put it in context, I think he had just come back from Woodstock and he was hanging out with Dylan and the band and really enjoying that experience and watching how the band was. There was no. Well, I guess Robertson was writing a lot of all the songs, but there was a much more communal experience there. And so he was coming back from that, back to a situation that probably still felt like the White Album to him, where he was just getting 1 or 2 songs on an album and not being able to really blossom as a songwriter.
Yeah, and I referenced Ringo working on Octopus's Garden. I liked seeing George kind of trying to help him, and it was interesting because Ringo just had the little snippet of it. I think that the biggest takeaway for me in terms of all of them is that Ringo is there to not rock the boat. He's like, whatever you guys want to do. I think that he definitely let them know. He's like, no, I'd like to play on the roof. When there was that little bit of, everybody wasn't sure that they wanted to do it. He actually said that he wanted to play on the roof. And I think John said that he wanted to. Let's keep it on George for a moment, Mark. Your thoughts on kind of watching, some of these things about George. You were talking about, well, Gene was talking about how much more there is in the longer versions of this, but what is your feelings of George, actually quitting and then, coming back? And we see so much more of everyone in this cut, these 8 hours instead of the 90-minute Let It Be movie. So what did it do for your impression of George during this time period?
That was always one of the most famous or infamous moments in the original Let It Be, was the whole, I'll play what you want me to play, or I won't play what you don't want me to play, whatever it is that will please you, I'll do it. That was always seen as emblematic of how bad everybody was getting along and all that. And in this documentary, and Get Back, you see much more context for when and why that happened, and that it wasn't tense all the time. But seeing him quit was amazing. Now, they say right up front in every episode, they don't have footage for everything you have audio for. So sometimes they're using footage to just sort of represent what was going on. But still, the fact that all got recorded, and it was seemingly very sudden. At least, and I rewound it and watched it twice. I'm like, what precipitated that? But he was just like, I think I'm leaving the band now. Excuse me? Yeah, I'm leaving. And then immediately Mal Evans is like, can we talk to you about residuals? It was just all business. It was very interesting. George seemed like he was really, for the most part, aside from, quitting the band, very relaxed through a lot of this and up for messing around and playing around and experimenting and working songs out and, coming to them with, something without full lyrics. And it attracts me like a pomegranate were the lyrics for a little while. So it was really interesting to see more of George, who didn't have a large role, so to speak, in the original Let It Be cut of this footage. He was sort of a sideman in that footage, unless he was performing one of his songs. So it gave you a little better idea of what was going on with him, and just what his personality was at that time. And it was really interesting to see, to me, because it was really the focus of that footage in what we had seen until that time was really Lennon and McCartney for the most part. So to get more time with George and with Ringo was, this whole thing for Beatle fans has been like the best early Christmas present maybe ever, aside from when the original albums were coming out or the anthology or something. So more time with George certainly was welcome for me.
I don't know if it was made, God, my throat, excuse me. I don't know if it was made clear in the documentary because I knew of it ahead of time, but George was the one who brought Billy Preston into the sessions, because I think it was a little bit of desperation or just looking for a way to get through this in a more enjoyable fashion. So he brought Billy Preston along, and they knew Billy from back in the Hamburg days when he was playing for Little Richard in his Little Richard's band. But once Billy Preston came in, and they've all said this separately, they felt the spirit was lifted, and the energy just took off, and they all had to kind of behave themselves because they had guests. but it was the best thing they could have done at that moment to just change the tone and the mood. And Billy just brings so many wonderful bits to these songs. And when you see him playing, you're able to pick out the parts and really understand what a foundation he gave to a lot of those tunes they were doing.
Yeah, it's hard to
turning point.
It's hard to imagine these songs without Billy Preston playing on them, you know? And I mean, we see some very early versions of some of these songs without him on there. And, you know, it's, you know, and I love that the whole time he seems like he's always got a smile on his face because, yes, you know, he's accomplished in his own right. But he's like, yeah, I'm sitting here playing with the Beatles. And I love when they're like, Billy, you don't have anything better to do you? He's like, what? No, I mean, I got to do Lulu's show, but other than that, yeah, I'm going to be around. And yeah, no, you know, the fact that he's up there on the roof with them, you know, Billy Preston is such an important part of these songs that I think, you know, we get to spend even more time with him. And I don't think it was clear that George brought him. Because the way they mention it in this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, they just mentioned that he came by to say hi and that they knew him from the Hamburg days because he had played with Little Richard, you know?
Right. I think one or more members of the group had made mention earlier in this timeline as you're watching it that they could use another person. Like another person to play piano, because the idea is that they're doing all these songs live and they can't do what they would do in a session, which is, you know, just take turns on the instruments. So then when Billy Preston came in, I think there was a mention later or an insinuation that maybe he would stay in the group after that. And maybe they would be a 5-piece at that point, which would have been
when George. Sorry. So how about when George quit? How quickly they started throwing around the idea that maybe Eric Clapton.
Well, yeah, it's like we're going to give him till Tuesday, and then we'll call Eric Clapton. You know, yeah. So yeah,
who married George's ex-wife. Finally, they were so.
And
close.
Is that the wife that's in this?
Yeah,
is the wife
Patty
that
Boyd.
Yeah. That then, yeah.
By the way, well, Linda, I'm sorry, but Linda looked so adorable in this film.
Well,
I've never taken to her so much as I saw.
I had to look it up. She was 27 at this point. I looked at her and like, what is she, like 19? And I know the world's different. You know, people, I guess, don't necessarily age in the same way. And she probably hadn't had a particularly hard life. But, you know, the first time I saw her, I'm like, how young is she? And I'm like, oh, she's 27. Also, I'm really old now. So 27 looks really young to me, probably. Yeah. But also someone who, of course, does not look really old, and I think is 27 at heart, is, of course, our dear friend, Tim Salmon. Is it salmon or salmon? I'm saying it.
It's salmon, like the fish.
Like, yes, Tim Salmon, but
salmon
not
truffle.
to be confused with our Salmon, the Dark Prince. Tim, when you saw that we were doing this show, you very quickly volunteered to spend a little time talking to us. So we've been talking a lot about sort of, you know, getting 8 hours of Get Back compared to the 80-90 minutes that we got from the Let It Be film. What are some of the big takeaways for you, for, you know, things that maybe you thought you knew and you've really learned more about, or just things that you were outright surprised by?
Well, I think the big takeaway was the relationship that John and Paul still had, because the way it was presented in Let It Be is very negative. I left Let It Be the first time I saw it in its entirety in New York City, hating Paul. I just thought he was not very nice to John mostly, but in this you see he's like Michelangelo, the way he works. It's unbelievable. The process of watching Paul work in the studio blew me away. And I loved him so much. I thought, this man is and he's such a great piano player, which I also didn't realize. There was so much about Paul that just blew me away in this documentary.
You know, one of the things that, Gene, you were saying earlier was that they talk about how Mr. Epstein, Brian Epstein, had recently passed away and how they were missing that figure. And it does seem to, on occasion, fall on Paul to try and kind of pull the reins a little bit, but he also doesn't want that role. I don't think he thinks he's suited for it. But there are times where you can kind of see, you know, that it's like, what, you know, why exactly are you the one trying to make, like, why are we doing another take on this? And, I read an interesting quote from John about Across the Universe, that he feels like they never actually got a good recording of it because Paul wouldn't spend as much time on his songs as he would on his own. And, I don't, and that's obviously the original version's from a different session. It was on it wasn't a soundtrack. It was a fundraiser LP. So that earlier version with the animal sounds, and I guess there are these girls as backup singers that were outside the studio that they recorded in. So that's a slightly different version. But John always felt like, in terms of lyrically, that's his best song, but he felt like they never quite nailed it. What do each of you think? And I'll ask you first, Mark, sort of this dynamic. And obviously, anytime they make an edit, we're missing something. But do you kind of see that from John, that it's like, oh, we're doing your song again because it's your song and you want to make sure we get it perfect? Or is that maybe something more that John was maybe feeling in hindsight after the Beatles were actually broken up?
There were those early 70s interviews. I think they were the Rolling Stone interviews, the Playboy interviews, where he was very bitter and not generous, shall we say, toward his former bandmates. And I was thinking about those while I was watching this, because watching this, it was like, well, they seem to be getting along pretty well, and they seem to be working together pretty well. So I think a lot of that was just what he was feeling at the time, that fresh, still stinging from the breakup when he was doing those interviews. I didn't get the sense, while watching the footage as presented to us by Peter Jackson, that he was really resentful of how many takes they were doing on others versus his own songs. I liked how willing he was to, he was very much in mess around mode for a lot of this. I think maybe more so, and I had to be reminded by a friend who's a Beatlemaniac that the Twickenham sessions were really rehearsals. That wasn't meant to be slick and professional and all that. Once they moved to Apple, there's still a little bit of that, but then they're trying to lay down tracks and be serious about it. But a lot of it was Lennon goofing off and, singing in accents, which I love. I'm glad the version of Two of Us with the accents that I've loved in bootlegs forever I got a visual accompaniment to this finally. But it seems like he was willing to do the work, and for no matter whose song it was, he jumped right in to help George with lyrics and give him advice on things. So I didn't really get that tension from what I saw watching this.
Yeah, I do think a lot of that's later, and you're right. There is a period in the early 70s, which, but that song "How Do You Sleep" is about Paul, and by the mid 70s, it seemed like that they were friendly enough so that, Paul's talked about John and Paul being at one of their apartments in New York and watching Lorne Michaels on Saturday Night Live offer the Beatles $3,000 to reunite, and they're like, should we go down? And then of course the fact that they didn't, which, just the quick aside on that is, of course, when George is on, there's in the background of Paul Simon, you can hear Lorne saying, like, look, if it was up to me, I would just give you the $750, but it's not, and the fact that was like such a big thing, and that they thought it was funny. So as tragic as it is that we lost John when we did, the fact that they were able to be friendly again, it can obviously make it sad to think about, in the 40 years since, well, God, they would have done something,
Well, there's a bootleg. I can't think of the name of the song. Maybe Tim, but they did a recording at some point later on with a big group of people, and it wasn't very good, and nothing came of it. But they did play in a studio and record some stuff that I don't even know if it was formal material, but they're. No,
I'm not familiar. I'm not sure.
That bootleg, it was called, it's titled "A Toot and a Snore" in '74. Yes. And it was Stevie Wonder and Jesse Davis and a lot of the LA session guys that Lennon was working with when he was out there. And McCartney came to visit. And it's one of those things where no matter how much you tell Beatle fans this, and they will never believe you, you'll say, it's really actually not worth listening to. They're like, no, but I have to hear it. And then they listen to it and they say, that really wasn't worth listening to. Right. It's just, the part at least what I heard was there's no actual songs on it from what I recall.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Tim?
Was when they were doing the sort of ventriloquist version of Two of Us, the two of that.
Oh yeah, when they're like, Two of Us. Yeah, that was great, actually. Yeah.
There were so many beautiful parts where you saw them acting like kids, and then you realize they're 28 years old. They're John,
the oldest one.
Yeah, John always seemed older though, didn't he? Even when he was a young man, he had
mention something before we get off this topic? Because you mentioned, Christian, how you thought, well, Paul might not want this role of being the big motivator and cheerleader, but I don't know if I fully agree with that, because there are times where John's talking with him, saying, you've got to lay back a little bit. I think this is maybe after George left, and Paul's agreeing, saying, yeah, I guess I do have to let him do his bits and stuff.
Yeah,
but
you're right.
What you have to remember too, during this time, excuse me, outside of the studio, Paul was the only one that was not married. And I've heard the others say, like, well, this was even earlier than Let It Be, where they'd all be really happy. They were all living out in the countryside or the suburbs, wanting to sit by the pool and just enjoy the success and things. And then Paul was living in the city, single, going to the museums, the galleries, and staying inspired and full of energy with new ideas for projects. And he would always be the one, even maybe as early as Sgt. Pepper or something, just saying, guys, I've got an idea. Let's get in there and do this and this and this. And they'd all be like, oh, here he comes with another idea. We just want to relax and enjoy things. So that's just his nature, I think. Yeah. And sometimes it could probably be overbearing. But I think he enjoyed that role.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
He also did mention at one point when they were talking, I think in the cafeteria, and he says, well, you've always been the leader, he says to John, which I thought was interesting, So
that
he
is
didn't
interesting. You're right.
think he could take the mantle, I guess, but and everybody always thought John was the leader. Anyway, you listen to the early stuff.
In the early days,
heavy John, so.
Yeah, but I guess as Gene referenced, it's hard to be the motivator and the leader when you're strung out on heroin. So, that is definitely not something that really came across. I mean, I just assumed that there was some degree of any kind of drug use that was, making him late. And I still stand by, like, how sick was Ringo? I mean, he's like sleeping in half of this, but what were you going to say?
How much they're drinking in the morning all through this. There's chain smoking and drinking throughout the entire film.
Yeah, I don't know, but I got the habit, man. I bought a pack of Marlboros after the first night.
Well, I mean, look, I wanted some toast with marmalade. There's the number of times they're like, should we have lunch? I'm like, didn't you just have lunch? But there's something very civilized and British about taking the lunch break. And of course, this was a different time. This is 50 plus years ago. But, you feel like bands would probably be urged to, especially when you're, paying for studio time in these days of like, we're not taking a lunch break.
But as George said, EMI is paying for it.
Yeah,
EMI,
one of the figures that I found interesting, but mostly annoying, is Glenn, who is so often referred to as Glennis, because of just the number of times that he's not ready with tape. And like they're about to go, and he's like, "Oh, do you want me to record this one?" And yes, I do understand this. Tape. What I think he said. What is it? It's 2 shillings a foot. And that's when George says what Tim referenced is like, well, EMI is paying for it. But it's like, we're the Beatles. You should really be recording a lot of this. But it's like, and then, when there's tech problems, he seems very annoyed. There was a day that they couldn't start for like hours. And I was like, what time does this guy get to the studio? So maybe it
was a makeshift studio. Yeah. Remember how
that's what I was going to ask. So, Gene, am I getting a bad impression of this guy from this movie? But I expected him to get fired, actually. Because he's like, I got to go do. He had to go do another project. Yeah. I was just like, well, great, get somebody else.
Well, he was pretty great in what he was able to do, and he grew from there and recorded some of the greats. But not only did they have this guy named Magic Alex, was it?
Oh, the guy who built the studio, yeah.
Yeah, who was helping build this studio, and nothing he built, it all sounded great, but nothing worked. So they were kind of backtracking from the stuff he presented them that didn't work, and then Glenn would have to come in and fix things and be ready. And it wasn't videotape, right? So he couldn't just record everything. He kind of had to let them do their thing.
Well, he also talked about possibly recording over it. And John was like, "You're going to record over it?" I mean, that's
right.
Yeah,
So,
which is funny because there's, this is the era from where the BBC was just recording over everything. I mean, there are hundreds of episodes of Doctor Who that they just erased, and then the only reason that we were ever able to see Monty Python's Flying Circus is because Terry Gilliam paid out of pocket and said, "No, I want these tapes."
nice.
And the BBC obviously made a couple of bucks off of that.
See,
So
the American comes through. Though.
yeah, right. The Americans saw the fact that like we could sell this. What are you doing? So yeah, the idea of the tape, but also as we're talking about in the studio, I love sort of just the matter of fact tape operator. Oh, Alan Parsons.
I know.
Which I remember from we had an interview with Alan Parsons on Dennis Miller's podcast, and I knew he was a part of these sessions, but I didn't remember. And then it's just sort of like, oh, there he is.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, George Lucas was a camera operator for the Woodstock movie, just sort of.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think so, unless I'm mistaken. But, just.
It was Scorsese?
It was Scorsese.
was one, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
He may have been in the editing department, I think.
I was a clip at the last waltz. I know that,
yeah. So I look, I don't have a good sense of studio stuff, so that's why I wanted to bring this up because I don't know. I think that my feeling,
you couldn't just run it, it was too expensive.
Yeah, no, and I know
like
it's
film.
different now. I've talked to enough musicians now that they have studios in their houses and they're all able to kind of connect and like you can adjust the levels in someone else's studio, remotely. So I understand that this was different, but. Tim, let me ask you, what were a couple of the other standouts just for you personally watching this, things that really jumped out at you, whether you knew them or maybe hadn't thought about them in a while? Is there anything that really stood out for you?
I think a single moment that I loved was when George comes in and he says, I wrote this song last night and it's Old Brown Shoe, and he's playing piano. And I mean, and just the fact that they were running through songs that would later appear on Abbey Road and in their early versions, I just, that is like gold to watch. I have to say, I put this on YouTube, on Facebook the first night. I said, I was actually practically in tears and sometimes actually in tears the first night, because it's the same thing when I took my daughter to London and we went to Abbey Road, and it's like going to Mecca,
Did you go in?
We didn't set it up. I felt stupid, but I got a shirt. See, I got my Rubber Soul shirt.
I was in. I spent an afternoon in there.
Oh man, I would love to do that. But I'm walking through just the gift store, and I'm just thinking about my childhood, and because it's my whole childhood, my whole life really, and it just I had to like walk away at certain points because
I get it. But
that was the same way during the first episode. I would sit there going, this is too much, man. This is like what you wait for. It's like the grail, like getting back to the Python thing. Amazing.
Yeah,
really
I agree.
Yeah. Is there, for you, Mark, is there anything that we haven't touched on? Because I want to talk about I want to spend a good chunk on the rooftop, but I wanted to get, anything that maybe you hadn't had a chance to jump in on, or as we've been talking, anything that kind of comes to mind for you in terms of, things that you've been particularly interested in, sort of as you watched this.
I think I might have mentioned, or we might have all mentioned, most of the big aha moments so far. But for me, the biggest thing was experiencing this footage and this moment in time in a somewhat leisurely way, not condensed to an hour and a half. And as somebody said, I think maybe Peter Jackson himself said, there are no talking heads in this. There's nobody jumping in to give it context and tell you why this is important or why it's cool. There's a little bit of on-screen titling that does that. That'll give you context for what they're talking about or show you an image that corresponds to what they're talking about, which I found helpful. If some things I didn't know, some I did. And when Paul starts to play Get Back, that on-screen title says you're going to hear this, what is going to become Get Back. Like he's creating it right now. Mostly it was just the fact that we were able to spend 8+ hours with these guys that we never thought we were going to have. It cleared up so much that was a misconception for me. It let you experience moments you'd only ever read about, like George quitting, Paul and John talking about that. What are we going to do? Them talking about, Paul not wanting to be the leader. Just so much vulnerability was captured on camera that I would not have thought they would have done with cameras being around. I mean, this whole thing, the idea was this was going to be some behind the scenes of them rehearsing that was going to lead into a TV special. It wasn't initially going to be a big documentary. So the fact that they planted secret microphones, they essentially bugged the Beatles, pardon me, was amazing, and what that turned up. So to me, I mean, there were just so many little things like that. Really, it's like the window into the past about this whole Let It Be project was fogged, and Jackson came in with a rag and cleared up the glass. So we were really able to see it for the first time properly.
Yeah, one of the things that I liked that it was clearly a choice by Peter Jackson. He slowed down the film and zoomed in on Paul when it's suggested that they play on the roof, and you kind of see that look on his face of like, oh my God, what a great idea, which is funny because he seems a little hesitant to actually do it later. But when he's first told about it, it's I don't know. I was excited to see sort of that very human reaction that even Paul McCartney can be like, you know what, this is such a really cool idea. We have to do it. And I really think that, you know, the presentation of it, you know, just getting to see the studio. And Gene, you were kind enough to send me a photo of when you and your brother Billy went to Abbey Road. When was that you went?
That was in May 95, because he was shooting Muppet Treasure Island over there, and I went to visit. Right. And our friend Louise Gold was doing a session there on a Sunday, and so we got to spend the afternoon there, which was like stepping into heaven. And Tim, I was just
that's awesome,
fighting back the tears, and you know, it was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, no, I wanted to work that in there. But this idea of playing on the roof, you know, and, you know, sort of, go ahead.
Before you get to the roof thing, I just wanted to point out two things, and tell me to shut up because I'm going to stop talking.
No, if I wanted you to shut up, I don't know why I would have asked you to come on, so don't worry about it.
Well, I want to mention two things.
Please.
One thing that was a real cool experience for me watching. Tell me if you had this similar experience. When they would be messing around, they would pull out an old song from maybe the first half of their career. And to me, it felt like they were playing another band's material because you think how much they evolved in an 8-year recording period.
Yeah.
And when they're bringing out, I can't think of one now, but something that was on maybe like a Rubber Soul or previous album. It was like they were playing a little fun, busking a cover of somebody else's song.
Well, they did a really slow version of Help, was definitely one of the ones that they did. And, you know, there are a few throughout. And, I agree. It is fun. It's sort of like slowed down and they're singing in deeper voices. And, you know, I think it.
But it felt detached from, you know, that. I couldn't picture them playing it as younger guys. But also, one of the things I always looked forward to seeing, which they included in the film, was that the day that George quit, they go back into the studio, the three of them, and they play this really aggressive, angry jam where Paul's got the guitar and the bass to the speaker, and they're smashing things, and Yoko's doing her and all that.
Yeah.
And I think it was just that, you know, all that built up frustration and anger at what just happened, you know, and being, you know, maybe it's the British thing, you know, where you don't want to express it you're expressing it in a way that's not healthy all the time.
It was sort of a punk moment. It reminded me of like if Helter Skelter is the first heavy metal song, that was like the first punk song.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to look at it. And, you know, they are so inherently British at times, you know, in terms of dealing with their emotions and talking, you know, about the way that they actually feel about things, and sort of not being as forthright as maybe people would think in, you know, the first quarter of the 21st century. And in terms of Britishness, we've seen the rooftop concert before, but I thought this presentation by Peter Jackson, I mean, even if that was all he had done, this would have been a masterpiece. Just sort of, the number of cutaways to people on the street. My favorite, I wish there were more of the people who didn't like it. The guy that they're just like, no, don't like it. And
the
it's
young
like,
guy, yeah, that young
it's like
guy.
not even a little bit. Yeah, that was the thing. It wasn't like the old guy who's like, this was very disruptive of all the businesses here in the neighborhood, and I would like to speak with the manager. Like a money
The old lady, they woke up. She said, "I was sleeping."
Yeah, I'm like, it's 11:30, or
sleeping it off.
It's like, what are you still sleeping? But yeah, the young guy who was like, no, I don't like it, and I loved that. And but then you also had the old guys who were like, there was like an older gentleman who was just like, oh no, they're great lads. No, anything they do is terrific. This is wonderful.
Yeah, would you mind if your daughter married one and said, no, they've got money?
Yeah. I loved that. Yeah. So I loved seeing all of that, and I'm not quite sure who like retweeted it or something, but there's a woman in London who posted, yes, thanks for everybody who's noticed. Yes, that is my mom in there, and no, she doesn't wear mini skirts anymore, and but she appreciates all of that. So it's like people like seeing people they recognize, because obviously all of these cutaways and people on other rooftops are not things that we've seen before. So let me ask you first, Mark, in terms of, somebody who, who's really bread and butter is projecting large images on a screen, just sort of watching all of this unfolded and sort of the many different angles and cutaways we had. Just talk about it cinematically, just sort of watching the way that the rooftop concert was presented.
I loved that it was presented that way. I'm sure there are some hardcore purists who are probably ticked off that for any moment anything overrode the sound, because you're while they're playing, you're cutting to other people talking and not the Beatles. It reminded me, seeing it that way, the early days of DVD. One of the great promises of DVD was the multi-angle. A lot of them had an angle button on the remote.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Watching this, I'm like, oh, for the Blu-ray, we need the angle button so that we can choose exactly what we want to look at. I thought it was really well done because it gave you a real-time sense of what was going on. You had the police who are literally at the door in the lobby. Yeah. They had the original filmmaker Michael Lindsay Hogg had hidden a camera in the lobby because he knew they wanted this to happen. I think they even say that earlier on when they're talking about the roof, is maybe we can be pulled off by the police, and that's how the film ends. So you see the police, you see the people who do like it, who don't like it. There is this subtle sense of tension. I mean, we know how this is going to end, but will they get arrested? Will they finish the number? Will they finish the concert? And just all the different angles. You see Billy Preston, which I don't remember seeing much of him on that rooftop in the past. To the degree we're watching it.
Yeah, I mean, he does get shown in the first film, but not as much as now. Yeah,
it was one of those things where watching it in the moment, I was like, oh yeah, he was up there too, wasn't he?
Yeah. But also too, what you're seeing here, and what I didn't realize for many years after the first film came out, was how many songs they really did, because they did 2 or 3 takes of several songs.
They did 3 takes of Get Back, and I think 2 I Got a Feeling. Maybe I'm wrong, but
yes.
And one of the nicest touches, and you see it for a couple on I think 3 on the rooftop, and then a few in the last sequence, when they let you know which take is the one that's on the album. And sometimes it comes at a time where they're like, no, I think we have already got it. All right, let's just do one more. And it's like, this is the one on the album, and the fact that that they got as much usable audio from the rooftop is really,
well, the three songs that made it to the album were One After 909, I've Got a Feeling, and Dig a Pony.
Right. So those are the ones, because the Get Back is not the one from the rooftop.
Right.
That's the studio one, which we saw at a different point.
And 2 of us. Yeah.
Yeah. But Gene, obviously, you have seen that footage a number of times, and a very early it's actually tomorrow. I believe it was 14 years ago, December 4th. We had on the Dennis Miller Show, we had Ken Mansfield, who worked for Apple Music on the US side. He was there, and he's this guy in like a white coat, and I only found him a little bit, but I did see him there. And it was just, I remember he had put out a book called The White Book about that, and he's actually written a couple books about the rooftop concert. But I just remember that many years ago, Dennis talking to him and just like, tell us about being there on the rooftop. And obviously he worked for Apple. And this really kind of highlights just there's a lot of people up there on that roof, and they're talking wondering about the weight. They clearly weren't that worried.
Well, you watch the floorboards, and George like jumps up. They jump up and down a little when they go out there. But I always remembered the official, video, as it were, for Get Back that MTV used to show. It was about the only part of Let It Be you could legally see for a long time in public.
Yeah.
And George it's like he's on a little trampoline, and those are not like stiff, strong boards. So, and they even say when the police come, like, we can't let you up there. I think we're overweight at this point. You might go through.
Yeah. They were going to go to that higher. So I was just going to say they were going to go to the higher roof as well, which I think was the roof to the part where they enter and exit, but they decided that was just too shaky.
Yeah. In the live chat, Cam Egan chimes in, seeing the backstory of the rooftop concert was incredible, just sort of watching all of it. But Gene, what I wanted to ask you was, there has to be sort of a way that this was presented that, was new to you. And what were some of the takeaways for you that was different this time for seeing all of this?
New takeaways. My biggest impression, and maybe it was part of the sound mix, but as many times as I've heard this and seen footage of it, it was just like on fire. I didn't even realize how much my body was moving along to it. And they were just playing so well and so fiercely in a lot of that. It was a perfect way to perfect thing to climax the film with, because it was so powerful. And you got to hear, and after hearing 7+ hours of them rehearsing everything, it was yet another way to discover the songs, because now you're hearing the parts that you saw developed in isolated form. So there was obviously more people on the street footage, and more angles and things, or even just seeing footage of the camera on a building across the street and other things like that. But
there's a great moment when because you're seeing some of the other cameras move, when the police first come up on the rooftop, you can see like cameras scramble and like, oh, we need this. We got to make sure that we got a good shot with the Beatles and the police are behind them. Tim, what about you watching the rooftop concert? What were some of the most fun things for you to see in there?
I think the surprising thing was the number of takes. I didn't expect that at all. I'm glad he left those in, that they actually did things several times, like they're actually recording a live record. The idea of doing a live record, I never really thought they had the idea of going up and doing a live album, but obviously they did, because they were doing several takes, one takes. And the whole idea of them doing one takes with no overdubs is beautiful too, just the whole way through. That was their plan that they talked about the whole time in the studio, which I thought was great. That's something real. It's like going out and recording live is what they wanted. I think Paul really wanted to do that. I don't know. But I got the impression also that John wanted to do it, and I'd always heard that he had terrible, terrible stage fright and would get sick and things like that, or anxiety. So I didn't see that. That wasn't apparent at all.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Gene, did John, as a solo artist, John did perform live though? Did he tour?
Very rarely. I don't think he toured, did he? He played.
I just didn't know. Yeah.
His last, he played, he came on stage with Elton John, which was the night he ended his long weekend, after they had been apart for 18 months. But I don't know if he toured at all. He played, some benefit concerts and things.
Well, he did Bladt piece in Toronto, of course, but with Alan from Yes, I had to get the Yes thing in there, and Klaus and Eric.
The Toronto thing when he did with Elephant's Memory, right?
No, with just the three guys, with John, with Eric Clapton, Klaus Vorman, and Alan White. Live piece in Toronto, where they played. Jerry Lee Lewis was there, all these rockers, and he said, I think the Doors were supposed to headline. I'm not sure if they did, but I actually met Alan White and talked to him about that.
Oh wow!
And told the story. It was amazing.
The something I wanted to bring up because I was reading about it earlier today. The timeline. Once this was all the films all took place in January.
Yeah.
I did read though. George came back, I think, the following January when they were trying to put the album together, and I think he did record at least one of his songs that ends up on the album at that point.
That ends up on the Let It Be album or on his
Yeah,
album?
it was the Let It Be album. It was either like For You Blue or My Me Mine or one of them. He came back later. But and then they recorded the Abbey Road album from February to August. And this is the thing I had never heard before or read. Paul kind of gets the credit for having really broken up the band officially, which he did contractually and did make that move. But it talks a lot about this meeting they had when he came back from playing a Toronto show with Elephant's Memory. They were having a meeting about what to do. They took on Alan Klein as the manager, and he was arranging all these new contracts so that they would not only get 17.5% royalties or something, but now they were getting 25%. Everybody but Ringo was there, and John was seriously thinking about leaving. And George and Ringo had quit at one point, but John was seriously saying at this point, "I'm finished, I'm done." And Alan Klein was saying to him, "Don't say anything, even definitely not publicly, until all these contracts are signed and everything." But he actually was frustrated in the meeting and told Paul and Ringo. I forget. I'm sorry. But he let them know in that meeting in mid-September, that he was out and he was finished. And so they just became, after that, the Beatles in name, and they weren't doing anything after that point. So a lot of people are saying that the Beatles really did end that day, and it was decided that day that it was over. And then it was a matter of time, in April of the following year is when Paul had his solo album ready, and he was saying, "I'm done." And it was all Paul broke up the Beatles. But John put it on the table, and the rest kind of just said, "Okay, I guess so."
Cam Egan chimed in with I Me Mine was apparently
okay.
what George came back and recorded. Yeah, sort of the dealing with the business side of it. They're talking about royalties and other publishing that they had bought and other artists they produce, and meeting with this guy Alan Klein. I think that getting some of that business stuff is in there is interesting, and sort of that conversation about like, well, the Stones get so much more of their publishing, and that was of interest to all of them. And I find that interesting. When it comes to the album Let It Be, obviously the version that was released, the Wall of Sound Phil Spector version, Paul in particular was not happy with that version. I believe Long and Winding Road in particular, he did not like what was done to that. And I don't know, it's about 15 years now, I think, that the Let It Be Naked came out. And
Naked.
I've been listening to those because that feels like more what we were watching. But what do you think, Mark? We watch all of this and we know sort of what happened in the studio to the album. Does it make it harder or has it been harder for a while to listen to those Phil Spector versions of these songs?
Not for me, because I've been a bootleg hound for so many years. So I had the Glyn Johns mix, which now is part of one of the new deluxe versions of Get Back or Let It Be, which I want to get because you can actually now get that originally intended version of the album on an LP, like it would have maybe come out 50 something years ago. Right. I listen to those bootlegs so much because as a Beatle fan, you listen to that music, you listen to the original albums so much, they're part of your DNA. You almost don't have to even listen to them anymore to still know and love them. But then you hear alternate takes where the vocal's different, or the lyric is different, or the mix is different, or some of the early takes of some of the earlier songs where the whole tempo of the song is different. So you get to know those. So I've lived with the alternate take versions of the Get Back material for so long that honestly, the original release version of the album is more of a novelty for me now, because I think I've probably listened to that less over the last 20 plus years than I have the kind of stuff we saw in this documentary.
Yeah. Same question for you, Gene, and then you, Tim. Sorry, I have to run upstairs, but I'm going to let you guys talk about sort of the album, and I'll be back in like 2 minutes.
Oh, well, there it goes. I still love the Phil Spector stuff. I mean, it doesn't, maybe Paul wasn't happy with it. I don't know if that was an afterthought or whether he was just unhappy from the start, but
it might have been the gunplay in the studio.
Yeah. But I love the Phil Spector stuff as well.
That's how I first knew that's how we all first knew it. So we all first fell in love with that music in that form. It's just interesting to have these options now, to have the naked version, to have the Glenn Johns mix now, to have this extra disc of outtakes.
That's what Paul said, when they did the Love album for Cirque du Soleil, and what's George Martin's son?
Giles.
It's not Giles. Yeah,
it's not Giles.
Yeah, I was going to say Giles. And he remixed it and everything. And Paul said, give him a break. This is just the old stuff is still there for you to hear. It's not like we've thrown away the other stuff. It's just, it's about time we can play with it a little bit and just do something new with it. And there's always been a big experimental side to Paul's work. He did 2 albums, maybe 1 or 2 albums as the Fireman with some other guy. I like a lot of that stuff, but he, so he, I don't see anything wrong with some of these remixes because the old stuff hasn't gone away and it won't.
Right.
It's fun to, it's there and available, especially in this day and age where any listener could have the ability to hear a song in any mix they like. They're kind of playing DJ anyway, so why not?
Yeah, it's one of the things that it's amazing what you were just touching on is that you can have anything at your fingertips pretty much at any time. I remember the days when, in order to see live music or video music, you had to wait for Don Kirshner, or Wolfman Jack. Literally, there was nothing, and to get a glimpse of a band playing was something. You had to go to a movie theater, to see a Beatle movie or something. So
right,
it's kids don't realize it. None of this stuff existed. It's amazing.
But just movies in general. I mean, now we're going to sound like old men talking about the past.
No.
Like, you had to wait until the movie came back to town to the art house. And,
That's right.
Or watch it on the Late Show on Channel 6.
That's right. Well, seriously, I remember watching. Jesus, why can't I think of Not Help, but Hard Day's Night. I waited up till 10 o'clock. I was about 10 years old. It was a 10 o'clock show, I think, on Channel 5 in New York, and I was living in New Jersey. But I, had to have toothpicks in my eyes to stay awake just to see it because you didn't have the opportunity to see it otherwise,
Yeah, that's how I first saw Yellow Submarine, was a late night Boston TV showing.
Right. Yeah. What's interesting, though, when you think about it, it's like it does make it the work more special. And as little, we got to see it once in a 5-6 year period.
Yeah.
But remember how much we remembered it.
I know.
And how much we could recall from it because it was that special and we were that much more focused on it. Whereas today you just think, if I miss something this time, I'll just, I'll
rewind it. Yeah, exactly.
And stream it.
Yeah.
Christian, you missed the best, deepest, most revelatory conversation.
We actually did an a cappella version of Across the Universe.
We did. And I hate to be the one to being the new guy, but you're out of the band.
That's fine. No. It's
wait. Since we've got this album cover up, are we gonna walk across the street now?
Yeah. Well, that'll be the next one. Yeah. No. I'm certainly. I'm not even the Pete Best. I'm the Stu Sutcliffe of this. Cammy Egan talking about. Would love to have the super deluxe set of Let It Be, but I don't have $1,200 to spend on it. If I'm not mistaken, the bootlegs come with the box set.
Wow.
I'm not even aware of that version of it, but that's
I think Michael Jackson's estate owns that version or something.
Yeah, that was Paul was very kind to, when Michael had all of his legal troubles before he passed away, he was very kind to offer, like, I'll buy my songs back from you. But it's interesting. I wonder.
Show and tell.
Yeah, go ahead.
My Paul McCartney life mask.
Oh my goodness.
This was made for Give My Regards to Broad Street.
I remember getting my awards.
That's very cool. Wow,
And
it's a little creepy, I'll admit, but it's still cool. Yeah.
My Ringo life mask.
That's
made
Ringo.
for the movie
Peace
Caveman.
and love. Peace and love.
He hasn't changed much, has he?
Not really.
And then for my 60th birthday, I bought myself some Beatles era autographs. Here's one that Paul and one from Ringo.
Sorry, guys.
It's all right. That's my show and tell.
You know, I thought it was funny as you showed me Ringo that somehow, you know, I had to send it to you, Gene. You hadn't seen the Saturday Night Live sketch when Ringo hosted.
Oh,
and he goes to the Beatles auction, and you know, people are buying like John Lennon's toothbrush and all of this stuff, and then they wheel out Ringo, and no one's bidding it. It's an actual Beatle, and so he clearly has a great sense of humor about himself, and I don't know, that was sort of one of the things I touched on earlier, is that Ringo is just like, yeah, I get to be in the Beatles, and maybe it's because he, even though obviously he was there for all the success, the fact that he got brought in later, he's like, no, this is really something great to be a part of. But you know, look, I find that all four of them are very endearing at times in this, and I just think seeing Ringo in this time period, you know, he seems to be the silliest, laid back, you know, but maybe because, you know, really they weren't really working on his songs at this point. Maybe that's what it was.
He said he learned how to play chess during the White Album because there was so much experimentation. He just sat around for so much of the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, no, that makes sense.
Paul was playing a little bit of the drums on that too, wasn't he?
Yeah. Birthday and something else.
Yeah, I mean, that's always sort of the knock on Ringo, is that, you know, he's the second best drummer in the Beatles, and that Paul was obviously able to be a drummer. I'm just saying that's one of those things that people say. But then when you actually watch him, you know, it's not like I think something like this, you know, sort of when we started, Tim, we were talking about this idea that people have that Yoko broke up the Beatles, and another is that Ringo didn't really contribute much. But it's like watching something like this, you can see both of those things are not true. And now
They were thrilled to get. So
ahead.
I'm just going to say, you know, Ringo always gets the shaft, but not the shaft, but just, you know, he's played down his talent. But fortunately, I think a lot of the more experienced and notable drummers these days are letting us know just why he was so great. And he was the best drummer in Hamburg at that point, and the Beatles felt privileged to have him join the band. And once he did, you know, they started to explode. And just think about it. Think about some of the compositions. If you strip the drums out and just put some other drummer in there, it's not the same song, and it doesn't have the same energy. And the parts he played for the song, things to support the melody and the rhythms. He wasn't a flashy feature drummer, and so he did everything he could to make those songs, give those songs the best foundation he could. Listen to I'll think of it. You were going to say something, Tim?
No, I was gonna offer you like Glass Onion. You know, I mean, the drumming is fantastic. You know.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting the idea that, I mean, I guess George Martin just very upfront said, you have to get rid of Pete Best. He can't keep time, and it was that simple. Like, no, he's actually terrible, and you guys are being held back by him. By the way, Cami Egan says, Gene, there's probably no more lonely nights at your place with that Paul. So I wanted to make sure we got that in there.
He's all mine.
Yeah. So, Gene, now, was there ever any idea of documenting the recording of Abbey Road just later that year, or was that specifically for these sessions because of what the original intention was?
I think that was the case, you know, because they set out, the idea was that they were going to do a big concert somewhere, and this was all just rehearsal footage to lead up to some big event. They were talking about playing at the pyramids and some really exotic places, and it wasn't meant to be it was just meant to be rehearsals and leading up to having this big climactic thing. So I don't think they filmed that much of God, I don't think they copied that much of Abbey Road.
And Mark, it's interesting just how much in the early portion of the first part they're like, well, I'm going to mention it again today, but how about we go play in Libya? And it's like, no, we're not doing that. Just the number of times that it was brought up, it was kind of funny, right?
It became amusing after a while because he keeps bringing it up, and he's just like the thousands of Arabs and the torches, and then one of the guys points out they won't speak our language. They won't know what we're singing. They'll just look at it. They'll see people staring at us playing. Then it's like, well, we'll bus in or we'll boat in English speaking people. They're like, maybe we could get the QE2 and fill it. They give it to us for free for the promotion, right? And then George says, we can't get an amp for free. It was. I think the whole idea of this was it was supplemental footage that they would, you want to shoot way more than you're ultimately going to need for a TV special. And then partway through, they even say, this is going to be a feature film. I think John or somebody says, this is the next film we have for UA now. And we still need to have that big ending. And everybody seemed pretty reluctant to really go much of anywhere to have that final concert. Thus, let's just go upstairs.
Yeah, which was a great solution. I'm sorry, what were we going to say, Tim?
So you mentioned equipment. Just they had some really nice amps, though. They had a couple of twin reverbs in there, and then Paul at one point, I guess Glenn asked him, "Do you have another bass?" And he takes out the Rickenbacker for the first time. Maybe he played it. I guess he played it on.
Yeah, he had it in the White Album.
Magical Mystery Tour also,
and the White Album,
but that was cool because I love the Rick. It's a great instrument.
I had that same model, but right-handed.
4001,
yeah, it's beautiful.
Chris Squire bass, also.
Is it same?
Yeah,
one?
that's Chris Squire's main bass. Yeah.
Cool. Mark, I also wanted to ask, tell me what you think about this. Like, it took a little while, but then it sort of dawned on me that. His name was Michael Lindsay Hogg, right? Was the director in 1969.
Spinal Tap.
The way that he carried himself, the way he looked, but his voice, he really sounded like Orson Welles to me. Like the way that he spoke and the way that he was sort of like just talking about everything. It's like I enjoy much of Orson's work, mostly as mentioned earlier, his commercial outtakes. Those are some of his finest work. But I just thought it was so funny that you had that voice on set that was reminiscent of that. Did that strike you at all?
He struck me as a quirky cat. I was talking to a fellow Beatle friend, these feverish text conversations we were having each day as we were each watching another episode of this series. Sure. And he pointed out that Michael Lindsay Hogg was alleged to have potentially been an illegitimate son of Orson Welles. And he had worked, he does not fail to mention that he had worked with Orson Welles in this documentary. So I think some of those affectations were either heredity or environment for that matter. But he struck me as kind of an odd guy. Sort of pompous. He could be, just in the interest of clarification, he could be a wonderful human being. But in the context of the footage that I saw, he seemed a little pompous and a little weird. And it was always English.
Almost English. Is that why he kept saying when he was looking at the fretboard on George's guitar, Rosewood? Is that what?
Yes, exactly.
Let me just real quick talk. I remembered the song. Go listen to the song Rain and listen to just Ringo's drum parts. Every fill is a new invention, and it's just remarkable.
It almost sounds backwards in my head. That just that sort of plodding beat. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but it never gets in the way. It never just jumps out. You have to listen for it, and then you see how wonderful it is. But it never gets in the way of what the guys up front are doing.
If you go into the deeper realms of Beatle bootlegs, somebody was able to take the Beatles rock band game and pull out each of the individual instrumental tracks. So if you know where to look for these things, you actually can just listen to Ringo's drum tracks, and it's fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually really cool. So I'll ask each of you this as we sort of wind down here. And I'm not asking anybody that, this isn't like one of those Beatle magazines that the guys are reading in the course of this. I'm not going to ask anybody to rank their favorite Beatles, but what I will ask each of you is if watching these 8 hours changed your perception of any of them in a significant way, or maybe just, this moment in time I understand better, or do you think differently about them in general now, maybe forever, because based on this. Let me ask you first, Tim, did it change anything of the way you thought about any of the four of them? Or I mean, you could also say it. Yeah, honestly, I feel that Yoko is really a misunderstood person, and this really sort of illustrates that. And again, Heather Eastman McCartney was one of my favorite people in this, as I mentioned. But what about you in terms of the four guys?
Well, I think I touched on it when I first came into the chat. Paul, I mean, I've always loved Paul, but there was something about him that sort of rubbed me the wrong way. And then I see the creative process that it's just amazing to witness Paul, because he had so many ideas, and he was actually fleshing them out right before your eyes. And just to watch that, it was amazing. And George, I mean, I saw a lot of the dynamic I felt when I saw George. Obviously, it was between him and Paul more, but they'd known each other since George was how old? 15 or something, so they had a lot of history, and he probably always felt at some degree like the younger brother or the younger guy in the mix. And I mean, he later would say, during that song, I can't remember the song, all those years ago, where he says, "I always looked up to you," and talking about John. So he clearly saw them as the older guys, the more experienced guys, or whatever. So I think that he really wanted to obviously express himself, but he had these two geniuses, in front of him. That it's hard. That must have been very difficult.
It's interesting too how his they all had their first solo albums, and his surpassed them all in sales and everything.
Yeah.
Who's the
George's?
Paul's? Oh, George's.
No, George,
yeah.
all
Like
things
a
must
coiled
pass.
spring,
Yeah, I think George, George in terms of, I guess, hitting a home run with his first one, and it is interesting. But look, you can point to all of them. George did also give us "I Got My Mind Set on You," and Paul did "The Unforgivable" and gave us "Silly Love Songs." So you see, you can always
I love the bass part in Silly
Me
Love
too.
Songs.
It's a
you
great
can love the bass
song.
part if you want, but it's still "Silly Love Songs," and he still wrote those words. And he to this day, I saw
Hey, what's
Paul
wrong
at
with
Dodger
that?
Stadium. I saw Paul at Dodger Stadium, I think 2013, 2014. And I was like, oh, he did everything you wanted to hear. And then this was on the radio. Somebody pointed out he didn't do "Silly Love Songs." I'm like, yeah, he did everything you'd want to hear. So, and look, I mean, I'm never going to not be a meat eater, but the fact that he's in his mid 70s and he still does like 3-hour shows, there might be something to being a vegetarian. I'm sorry. What were you going to say, James?
I've spent many years, not now, but many years as a vegetarian and vegan and everything. And the dog's calling. And he and Linda played a part in that for me. They give me some influence. Anyway, what was I going to say? One thing that's really impressive. I talked about Paul doing an album under the name The Fireman. Go if you want to be impressed by his stamina. I think he was at least in his late 60s, early 70s when he did this song called Nothing Too Much, I think, where it's just like he's wailing and screaming like he does, at the end of Let It Be and stuff. Go take a listen to that and get a sample of the endurance he still had, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it was like 7-8 years ago that I saw him, and I didn't go see him again. I think it was in 2019, which I believe, because of the pandemic, it's still the last concert that Paul has played to this point. I had seen him just a few years earlier at Dodger Stadium, and the day didn't work, so I didn't go. Of course, he was joined by Ringo for that show, so that's that will certainly be my regret.
The Ringo's All-Star shows are really good shows to see.
I've never seen one.
I've never seen one either. Yeah.
I've seen 2 of them, and because he has a lineup of these superstars in their own right, and they play their songs too. It's not just Ringo's music,
right?
So they're really worth seeing. I saw him at the Hollywood Bowl when I was living out there, Christian, and then and here at the Tower Theater. Yeah, they're worth seeing if he goes back on the road.
Well, Mark, I want to ask you the same thing, sort of, overall thoughts about the four of them. Anything that changed? Obviously, you've spent a lot of time, reading and watching and knowing what they thought about things, but actually seeing them at this time period, did it change anything, the way you thought about anything in terms of the four of them?
Well, I never pictured Ringo as a gentleman who would warn others that he had recently passed gas, but that was a magic moment.
It was that was the magical Christian, I believe.
That's what the magic Christian refers to.
Yeah.
Actually, made it first to you. Overall, I don't
That's
think it changed my opinion. It made me realize that John was not completely out of the game, shall we say, during these sessions, which was sort of my vibe from what I had read and what the original Let It Be film. It's just he was there because he had to be. He didn't want to be. He wanted to be with Yoga. He was engaged clearly in what was going on. And overall, it was just this film gave me a better sense of who these people were as people in their work relationship, as opposed to rock icons in fleeting images that you had. You spent 8 hours with these guys at work, and that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I legitimately can't imagine watching it again, just because of I never finished Squid Game. Like, the amount of stuff I have to watch, I put this at the front that I wanted to watch it, but I could definitely hang on. I could definitely see going back and watching this presentation of the rooftop concert again. I also think that if it's ever presented in a different way, either on Disney Plus,
it is.
Well, I would break up each of the days as chapters, is what actually I was thinking would be a good way to do it. Because, look, that's the way I actually had to watch it. I couldn't sit through any of these just because of, I was tired. My life, just I had to go get the kids. So I would stop sometimes on a day. I tried to not stop where, like, it wasn't the ending of a day or ending of the part. So I hope that it's made a little bit more accessible in that way. What do you say?
There's two things.
Yeah,
there's two. Well, there are rumors that the Blu-ray or whatever might have 5-6 extra hours, but there's also, but just like last week, there's a 100-minute feature version that was screened in London to a big celebrity audience. So there will probably be that making its rounds at some point. His own encapsulation of it all. In the same, with the same length as the original film.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, Tim, what were you going to say before?
I don't remember, but I know in the version that Gene just referenced, Ringo actually wins somehow. I don't know what. He comes out on top somehow. It's amazing.
Oh, come on,
Ringo. The other three quit, and George is just sitting there in Twickenham by himself.
Yeah, Ringo clearly wins in so many ways. It's in terms of one of the greatest videos released of our lifetime is Ringo's "Peace and Love." Right. No more autographs after October the 10th. It'll be tossed. That's still my favorite. That might be my favorite Beatle moment. And I'm joking, but it's up there. In any case, I really appreciate all of you taking the time to chat about this. Tim, do you have anything that you'd like to promote? You want people to follow you on social media? What would you like?
I mean, not really. Not really. Yeah. No, I don't have anything.
Just the next time you're on the Bladtcast, people will know to say hi. Well, Mark, we mentioned the drive-in, we mentioned the podcast, but let's let everybody know once again where they can find all of that.
If you go to mahoningdit.com, that's the general website for the Mahoning Drive-In Theater.
You have dit.com. Those 3 letters weren't taken.
Mahoning DIT is one word.
Oh, Mahoning DIT. I thought you said just DIT. That's like if somebody had like Steve at AOL.com. I'm like, wait, you were the first Steve?
Oh, so I see somebody with an email address. I'm like, how did you not have a number at the end of your name? This is amazing.
Yeah,
I think I bought it from Gene Simmons, though.
Yeah, you got it on the ground floor of that. MahoningDIT.com is our website for the theater. Anchor.fm/Mahoning Drive-In is our podcast. And if you go to one of those 2 places, you can find everything else that we do.
Right. And then they'll find you as well. Oh, there's a Patreon, according to Gene.
There is a Patreon that can be found through the website.
Okay, great. And everybody can find everything. And Gene, I will not cut you off of your plugs, but Kemi Egan, I saw Ringo and his all-star band 2 years ago. It was a blast. Before the show, a friend of mine had money to burn and paid $6,000 for a meet and greet with Ringo.
Wow.
he signed her arm and then she had it tattooed. I've seen people who've done that. You mentioned Gene Simmons a minute ago. $6,000 for a meet and greet. Paul, we have to revisit because it's $1,000 for a Kiss meet and greet.
Really?
And you meet Gene and Paul and the other two guys.
They promised to leave Ace at home.
Yeah. So Gene, obviously there's the Barretta Brothers podcast. What else should people know?
The Barretta Brothers podcast, which is more Muppet centered than anything, because my brother is one of the Muppet performers and producers. But I write and illustrate children's books, and everything that I do is on genebarretta.com, and that's 2 R's and 2 T's.
Yes, so that's Barretta, obviously. Yeah, and you're
in one of my books, by the way. Remember?
I think I'm in 2 of your books. I'm wearing a Mets uniform in one of them.
No, that was just something I drew for you solo.
Oh,
that was just a gift. But you're in my Lincoln and Kennedy a pair to compare.
That's right. I knew that I was in one of them. Wait, am I at Ford's Theater running out the back door?
You're at Ford's with
it's
the
a little
others.
that everybody missed that episode of Quantum Leap. But in any case, yes, I always appreciate that. And I have framed up in my room, I have a Chimp Doctor sketch that you wrote for me. So and Mark's just looking like a
no, everything's better with chimps. I'm all for it.
Look, you can't just exactly. There are some people who would definitely not disagree with that in one way or the other. In any case, I do appreciate all of you taking the time. People in the chat seem to enjoy this conversation, whether they watched it or not. Thank you to everyone.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.
I would like to say thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves, and I hope we pass the audition.
And in the end.
Well, good. What, you know what, Gene? Why don't you take us out with a little Her Majesty?
I don't know it. Wait, I'll give you here we go. I got a feeling I can't hide. Oh no.
By the way, it's just a complete aside on the Japanese pressing of Pearl Jam's first CD. There's a bonus track, and it's Pearl Jam doing "I've Got a Feeling," and I will admit that was the first time that I really heard that song in 1991.
It's a cool bootleg. Speaking of Her Majesty, here's the quick story on that: is that Her Majesty was originally planned to be in between Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and there you can find the original mix with it right in there, and you see how it fits in. But they edited it out at one point, and they just tagged it onto the end of the tape reel, and they forgot about it. And so when they were doing their mix, they just let the tape run at the end of the end, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they're just sitting there, and all of a sudden, Her Majesty pops in, and they said, oh, "We got to keep it. We got to keep it." So that's why there's like a 15-second or something.
A friend of mine, she told me that her goal was to start a band just so that she could do like an 8-minute version of Her Majesty. I think that she just wanted to be able to do that live. Well, for editing purposes, I will thank everyone again. And I will say again, I would like to say thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves, and I hope we pass the audition.
Yay!